So the next item up is the CRL update. And so I think we've got Pat Brocky and Bevan Assink, Mark Lambert, and Joel. Welcome. Morning, gents, and all yours.
Good morning. Nice to be here. I did hear that question around when we're opening, but maybe we'll tackle that later. But this is both an exciting and intense phase of the project as we prepare for asset handover to Auckland Transport and Kiwi Rail, my two colleagues on my left and right, and Auckland One Rail as the rail operator. There's really strong collaboration between all the parties. And as you've had us comment on the two gentlemen beside me, we've been working together since I joined the project in 2019. These partnerships go back that far, and I think it's really important when we have the speed bumps in the project towards completion that we can work collaboratively together and know each other well and trust each other and have respect for each other, because that's a really important part of trying to get to completion. Testing continues. I know you've heard me say that quite a lot over time, but that is the case. We're just completing some of our trial operations testing this week, which is really just testing out the station, opening, operating it, maintaining it. A really critical part of testing at the moment is the emergency response testing, and that's testing various emergency scenarios at the stations, but in the tunnel. We had one on Saturday. There was an evacuation on the train. And we had over 300, we call them proxy passengers, for that test. These are consecutive Saturdays with large numbers of people to simulate, a real scenario. This involves really strong collaboration with FENZ, with St John's, with police, and that partnership with them is critical and has always been very strong, and that continues. There are always learnings from these tests, so we take the tests. It would almost be a greater concern for me if there weren't learnings. I think that we take these learnings and then we may have to retest, but there are learnings for all parties involved with the testing. But again, it's mostly so far been a really positive experience. The final phase for us and also another critical phase is the assurance process that we go through. And that's working very closely with the rail regulator, NZTA. We also have some very experienced international parties that work closely with us for this is providing the assurance that we need and my partners need when we hand over the asset. That's for safety assurance, and also is the asset fit for purpose when we open the railway. So these are very experienced parties that have been working with us from the get-go, but this back end of the project, their work and their assurance and sign-off or certification is critical. Also part of that is what we call quality assurance, which I normally refer to as the paper project, and that is a pretty significant amount of work. A lot of resources being thrown at that by our contractor, Link Alliance, and other parties. This includes, as an example for council, is the Code of Compliance certification that we need for the 3 stations. But it is a significant and intense work as we lead into trying to complete this by the end of June is our target. I'll go hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Pat. Good morning, councillors, Mayor. I've just got a couple of slides that go over the network structure, the timetable structure, and now that we've completed the tests across the whole network, not just CRL, in January and in April. So we undertook network-wide testing on the 13th and 15th through the 15th of April. The test followed the January trials, which did create a number of challenges for us, particularly around congestion on the network. Therefore, in April, we did close the network for 3 days to test the base timetable, increases in service frequency and amenity, and also systems across the wider network as well, and integrating the new CRL systems into the broader legacy network. The timetable was demonstrated to be deliverable and resilient, and we're now moving forward with that with a few amendments. But it is pleasing to also see, this sounds counterintuitive, but there were a number of disruptions unplanned that actually happened during that 3 days of trials, and the proposed timetable did actually react well to that and did recover reasonably well to those disruptions. We're now able to confirm the network structure, which was previously launched last year, with, like I say, with some relatively minor amendments. The east-west line is confirmed, but without a peak-only diversion from Mungafo through to Newmarket, which was creating quite a bit of inconsistency and confusion for some of our customers when we were testing that through some customer panels. Also confirmed the South City line, which will loop through the City Rail link and terminate at Newmarket. And we brought that up from terminating at Otahu, and that reduces a lot of the congestion on the existing network, which was causing us some problems in the January trials as well. And confirmed the blue Onehunga West line, but taking the opportunity with a bit of feedback as well from various groups to extend the peak from Newmarket through to Mungafo, so improving that Onehunga West offering. And there was a request, I think, at the last committee meeting just to provide a simple, hopefully simple, table on what the service frequencies look like on day one and some progressive service improvements over the following 6 months. We have confirmed what international projects have been telling us, which is we should start with a lower level of service frequency on day one rather than a big bang, and then progressively increase that over the following 6 months or so. So in the table, just very briefly, for the day one launch in the off-peak period, which basically means the weekend between the peaks in the weekdays and the evenings, we're offering 4 trains per hour, 15-minute headways across each line. That's an improvement over the current 20 minutes. During the weekday peaks, we're increasing the east from Sylvia Park to the city from the current 6 trains per hour or 10-minute frequencies to 8 trains or 7.5-minute on average frequencies, and from the west across the whole of the west, retaining at least initially 6 trains per hour or 10-minute frequencies, but from Kingsland inwards, we're able to increase on day one that up to 8 trains, which is on average 7.5-minute frequencies. The first increase post day one that we're proposing is to extend that higher frequency in the west from Kingsland further west through to Henderson. So that will increase the service offering for Western customers within 3 months of day one opening. The second step up we're looking at is to increase the service frequency on the south as well. And that is subject to some testing between Otahu and Waimataa, but we're hoping to do that very early in the new year. This does deliver on the previously communicated journey times or savings in journey times. For example, there is a journey time saving of 10 minutes from Henderson to Waimataa compared to existing train services, and delivering on the journey times previously communicated to the new destinations. So, for example, Henderson to Te Waihoratu would be a journey time of 35 minutes. Just briefly, and Pat's touched on it already, we are in the middle of emergency trials, and those have been going reasonably well. There's a few retests and a couple of retests that we need to do, but there's around 15 key tests that are happening during April, May and June. The expectation is that those tests will be complete in early June, and there's 4 large tests that are happening on Saturday mornings and involve over 300 what we call proxy passengers, which are primarily evacuations from tunnels or from stations in the event of a fire or derailment. And our final slide is just a brief heads up on the remaining closures through to early June. So Saturday mornings are closed to allow for the CRL testing. There is a weekend, 23rd to 24th of May, where we're completing the Henderson, or Kira is completing the Henderson station upgrade works. And finally, over King's Birthday, QRail will be completing their rail network rebuild and undertaking maintenance. That's the presentation, so I'm open to questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Someone like to move? Oh no, sorry, as you were. Daniel.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions from me. The times to Waitemata via Newmarket on the south line. So from Newmarket to Waitemata, approximately how much longer will it be on the south line? Because of the route change, Grafton via as opposed to Parnell.
So if you're travelling from Newmarket, you can go in either direction. So if you get on a train going via Parnell, the same. It's in the order of 1 or 2 minutes longer going the other way, accounting for the additional number of stops. So it's very close, but it is slightly longer if you're boarding that train anywhere south of Newmarket.
No, that's all right. That doesn't seem like an unreasonable burden, given the increased frequency overall. So, and I guess one other question for me, the perennial, so the project closeout is sometime in June. So what's the start, what's the grand opening? You've got that yet?
We are still saying the second half of this year, primarily because, like I said, we're in the middle of the trials, and those, while they're going reasonably well, we don't want to identify an exact opening date just at this point until those trials are finished. We will be in a position shortly after those trials to be able to narrow the window down, and there is a required 6 to 8 weeks to effectively notify staff, particularly on trains, before we can actually launch.
Okay, so on what date will you be able to give me the date for the opening?
As I said, when the trials are finished, we'll be in a better position to be able to give a date.
Good try. Matt?
Yeah, it's unfortunate the previous item took so long. I have to go shortly, so this is going to be structured as a question at the end. But it's unfortunate that since your last presentation, something in the media has come up where our former CEO has said that this could have been half the price. We are looking at a 7.9% rates increase because of the CRL and the operations, and considering the interruptions that have gone on to the community who have been using public transport with the trains, the close downs, and I appreciate that there is a lot of work to go. This simply cannot fail. So with all of the testing that's going on, the last thing that I would, well, any of the councillors would want to be hearing is there are learnings to come from this, because there's a lot of work going in, and I appreciate that, but this simply cannot fail. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I'd simply say that, you know, through the testing that we're doing, we're not seeing anything that greatly concerns us about finishing the project and having it open to the public. And no one wants that more than we do. And the workers that have worked very hard on the site over a number of years desperately want that as well. But I'd just say, without trying to jinx it, that things are going well with the testing, and we're positive about a prompt opening. In terms of lessons learned, I hear what you said, but we are proposing to undertake a lessons learned regardless. There are many aspects of this project that I think are worth reviewing. We've agreed with the sponsors that we will do this. We're actually underway with that work, and that will review various aspects of the project in order to benefit the next large infrastructure project, whether it be the Cross Harbour Tunnel or bridge. And so we really want to take those learnings. It could be, for example, I'm looking at Julie on the video, a targeted hardship fund, sustainability, working with Rangatahi, with the young Māori in Pacifica, all the way through to the design, which I know is dear to the Mayor's heart. We will cover all aspects of the project in a very open and transparent way.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Sarah?
Kia ora. I'm going to ask a shockingly predictable question, but of all of your test participants on the couple of slides previous, do they include disabled people, seniors, and those who may not have fluency in the English language?
I can answer that if you like. So just to tackle people with disabilities. So we've been working closely with Auckland Transport's accessibility advisory groups to ensure that they are participating in that. More broadly, the participants in the trials are employees of Auckland Transport Council, Kiwi Rail, City Rail Link Limited, so partner organisations. And at this stage, there are no children or elderly people who are not working a part of it. But there is, there are people, I suppose, simulating a whole range of different people to make sure that the procedures are in place, for example, for evacuating people with disabilities in wheelchairs and all of those requirements. So to the best of the ability within the constraints of who's able to be part of those trials, yes.
Thanks, Stuart. Ken.
Thank you. So just obviously there's quite a bit of flexibility after startup. You'll assess what's going on and you're hoping for some improvements that you've already seen, and you'll be responsive to any other pressures. Is that right?
Like I say, we propose a day one transition timetable with progressive step-ups, absolutely, and we'll be monitoring patronage and everything else. We can make some changes to train allocations, for example, and whether we're operating 3 versus 6 cars to respond to different demand. So absolutely, we'll be monitoring that and responding to that.
Good, thank you. Just last small question. These trials, these practice runs, is there a requirement to do that periodically for the following, do you have to do that every so many months or forever?
In terms of evacuations with the emergency services, that's what you're referring to? Yes.
Yeah, in other words, you have to keep making sure your currency is correct. So how often do you have to do that?
It varies based on the different emergency and different emergency services, but typically every 6 months or so. It's like fire alarm tests and things like that. We have to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Chris.
Mine is to speak, not a question.
John.
Yeah, great to see the progress here, and we're getting to the end of this, and certainly anyone that's been on a tour, it's a pretty impressive project when you see it, and I'm fortunate to be down at various points along the way, and what always stood out to me was the fact that the workforce were very much engaged in what they were doing, so there certainly no case of idle hands. However, and to follow on from Councillor Winiata, you will be aware, of course, of the coverage in the last week, and that's what most Aucklanders will have been reading. So, we've got this kind of contrast of this, long-awaited project that is a pretty impressive feat of engineering. At the same time, we have the issue to do with the cost. So, if you don't mind, I'll just zero in on the cost for a minute, and it goes to the comments about the review. Now that Minister Bishop has committed to doing a review of the project, is that the same review you were talking about, or a different one?
Perhaps I might just speak to that. There's a couple of reviews coming up. There's the one that Pat has spoken about, which is lessons learned, and this is from the construction design side and people being hands-on involved in the project. There's also, we've just recently had a gateway review completed by Treasury, which was a standard review completed to be done before practical completion. That was a very positive review, and there is another review to be done towards the end of the project, which is a retrospective one looking back on the total project and funding and how the whole project performed. So that's yet to come. That's probably going to be 18 months or so away, I would think, before that one's completed.
So this one that Mr. Bishop's talking about, is that the retrospective review? Is that the one he's talking about?
That's a retrospective review, that's correct.
So I guess the obvious question that any member of the public would ask is, the degree of independence of the review. So who do we have at this stage the notion of the people that will be actually doing the review?
Yes, the review that's being led by City Rail Link Limited, that has an independent the independent party who's going to run that review, they also have an independent party who's coming in to kind of review it at the end to ensure that that review is truly independent and has that oversight of it. The other one will be led through Treasury. Yeah.
Okay, so just a little further to that, obviously, you know, Mr. Sweeney made a number of comments, and you know, certainly one that stood out to me was that when he had asked about, you know, where potential savings, and it was prompted by the government, could be made, he was told AT and Kiwi Rail came back and said they couldn't find anywhere to save money, and I didn't have the expertise or the background to challenge them, quote unquote. So in terms of both the review, when I think of Mr. Sweeney, who was at the top of the tree, if he didn't quite have the expertise or background to challenge things at that time, I'm wondering, in the first instance, whether the reviewers have that degree of expertise, because you know that this was CRL itself didn't appear to have that expertise, according to Mr. Sweeney. So one, checking what the character are of the people doing the review in terms of that, you know, rather disturbing statement, and secondly, I guess just in terms of the opportunity today, whether there's any comment in respect of some of the observations that were made, and I say that, you know, not to have a ping pong or debate or anything, but because it was relatively brief. We had a reference to the 9-car versus 6-car and the flasher finishings inside. Now, I'm assuming if there's a half-price claim being made, there's something a little bit more substantive involved than just the widening of the, you know, the lengthening of the platforms and the artwork in there. So, first one, the expertise, and that kind of goes to independence and knowledge. And secondly, is there anything anyone would like to add today, given, you know, this has been raging in the media for the last week?
Perhaps, Pat, if I just address the first one, and then you might like to fill in a bit more, Pat. The reviewers have been, the parties who are doing this have been selected because of their experience on major rail projects, particularly in Australia, but elsewhere as well. Also, I just mentioned that the sponsors, we have our own independent reviewers on this, TSA, who have significant rail experience and have provided real valuable input into this. It's actually worth, just aside, watching all of Sean Sweeney's interview if you get the chance, because he does talk a bit about how you might save some of those things, and it was quite enlightening. He was talking about platforms for 3-car trains and stuff like that, so it's not what we've actually got here, so it is worth watching that video in full if you have the opportunity.
Just to add to what Barry said, so with the reviewers, they are international, they are experienced. The peer reviewer that we are seeking to engage will also provide that level of independence. We genuinely want that. But as CRL, we generally want a really thorough review, and we're committed to that. I would suggest on the cost side, and I did issue a press release at the time, that there are, it's very difficult comparing apples with our project. Obviously, we have a network that has passengers and freight. It's a complex network, as we've found out with the timetable testing. And so there are lots of variables, and it's very difficult to make those sort of comparisons. I did talk also about the 9-car decision. That was back in 2018, and I won't relitigate that now, but that also involved a new station entrance at Karangahape with Beresford Square, which I think most in this room would agree is, I think, a very valuable addition to that area. I think it'll be a very popular station. We also incorporated the ability to have platform screen doors. That's not something that we can implement right now, but the actual structure along the platforms is in place, so that when we do put them in place in future, we don't have to close down the stations. So that expense and money was looking at the future, because I think at some point in the future, and maybe it's a way out, but that will be required. And then, of course, the other big one that we faced, that many businesses faced in New Zealand, was COVID. And that was a significant impact on the project, both from a time and cost perspective, not just the construction costs, but CRL costs and various other costs were impacted by COVID. We lost a lot of days through COVID. And those are all significant impacts in terms of the time and the cost that we've incurred on the project.
Just one final question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. In respect of this, entirely disproportionate investment in terms of the council's balance sheet over the last decade, obviously, one of the things that's going to help this, the public perception is a big uptake. A huge transformational uptake, and I think of the lag with the Northern Busway, where there was quite a considerable lag between the provision of the asset and then people using it the way they're today. So just to close off the kind of line of inquiry, what do you think is going to be a realistic expectation in terms of a very significant uptake as opposed to a kind of slower burn that may not seem to be that impressive? So what are we thinking of doing to ensure that we have that degree of transformation, given the huge financial commitment this has been and will continue to be for decades to follow?
We have taken the original business case assumptions around uplift over the first 2 or 3 years, to be fair, as you point out. It will take a while for it to grow, but at the same time we are planning around some significant increases in the first few months or so. We've got a plan for that as well. So it's built into our patronage forecasts and into the budgets moving forward, which I understand I'll come into the council and the governing body fairly soon.
Maybe if I just add, part of what I'm responsible for, making sure that it's communicated to Aucklanders. So we have a plan around that and sort of increasing that as we get closer. We also have our team in Auckland Transport who works closely with businesses, doing a lot of engagement with city centre businesses, particularly those close to the new stations at the moment, working with them on travel plans for their employees and really, I guess, pulling out all the stops in terms of that work that we can do to let people know that it's there and that they can benefit from it.
Morris?
Yeah, look, I just want to almost traverse the things like the Infrastructure Commission's report, where they said we are amongst the highest in the OECD for spend and amongst the lowest in the OECD for delivery. And this has got to be one of the best examples of that. When John Key made his announcement in, I've got it here, January 2016, he said the project would cost $2.5 billion, the Crown would put up 1.25 and Auckland Council would put up the other half. How come that just never happened? How come we're at numbers that are eye-wateringly different to what the planners had put all the work into saying it would be? And it was not COVID, because the numbers had spiralled out of control long before COVID hit.
I guess it depends on how far back you go.
This is the original announcement.
The business cases are always based on very basic, very preliminary designs. First major design that we had, significant design that we could rely on, was well after the business case, so that would have been 2018. And that's when the other decisions were made on some of the additional scope. But when you have a preliminary design, that's always a cost estimate that is, again, very preliminary in itself. And things evolve, from there. Once you have a firmer design, then the cost estimates are a little bit more reliable. And then, as I said, and this is not a justification, because our focus right now is completing the project and having a successful opening, so Aucklanders and New Zealanders can enjoy this asset. That is our primary focus right at this moment.
Yeah.
But then, and there will be the time and the lessons learned to review some of this. And you ask good questions. We are conscious of those questions. But I've also touched on the COVID element. You cannot underestimate, because we calculate we've lost nearly 12 months with the impact of COVID. It's extremely significant, and that was in our last costing round, funding round in 2023. That was the primary driver of that funding round. And then in 2019, the previous funding was largely related to additional scope.
See, I come from it from a perspective of trying to assuage grumpy constituents, and terribly grumpy. I wrote an article for the local paper recently which says the 225 million rate increase, the 7.9 we were putting on them, a record, was solely the total cost of what it was going to be to run the CRL. And had we not had that, we would have been able to stay at sort of a zero. I thought the article was great, and I was really pleased, and I said, that's how much we've tightened our belt and so on. It came out the same week that Sean Sweeney came out and said, grossly overspec, dreadful bloody escalators too many, large stations, extra facilities, extensive, significantly increased costs of everything and so on. So I've ended up with people in the street saying, well, so much for your bloody 7.9% rate increase. You go and blow it on a system you didn't need to. And the guy that was the chief executive of it was the one that said it. It's not like it's some think tank out there or somebody. He was chief executive for running the place. Do you understand how difficult that is for us to sell it to a public when those comments come out? And didn't seem to get any much pushback from anybody.
No, I do appreciate it, and it's not something we take lightly, and I think that the appropriate form for that is probably through our lessons learned process and sharing the outcomes of that with in an open and transparent way, because we certainly will not hide from it.
Okay. My final question quickly then is, I've found in politics the number of people who are prepared to be honest after they've left where they were working or when they were no longer a minister or not standing for Parliament or whatever. Can I just check, is there any of you that are likely to tell us a very different story once you've quit the roles you've got? I just want to get it in advance of when you do tell us that it was a disaster, and is there any of you likely to do that? Okay, I'll leave that open.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much for this. I was looking at the timetable slide, and it doesn't help me when I'm out there in the community talking about the benefits of the City Rail link when it says that the travel times on the Eastern Line don't change, like there.
So
Is that day one?
the why we say the travel time to Waitemata station is the same, your trains are going along the same route towards the city. I think the biggest benefits for Eastern Line users will come from more frequent trains, so trains coming more often both off-peak and from day one during peak times. And also then obviously the ability to stay on the same train and connect through to the new station. So if your constituent is getting on in somewhere on the Eastern Line and their offices nearer to Waihorotu Station in Midtown or Karangahape Station near K Road, they will save a lot of time getting to their ultimate destination. But the trains will take about the same amount of time to reach Waitemata Britomart as they do today, because they're following the same lines and the same stations.
Oh, thank you. And also, I think that is a good distinction in terms of you'll be able to travel to a different destination than what we're normally doing. And then also the fact that it won't be bus, train, it's just straight train.
Yeah, absolutely right, and that's the big, I guess, outcome of that east-west service on the new network is it's a single-seat journey right through the new city centre stations for those eastern users.
Oh, that's great, thank you. And also, I'm one of your volunteers for the evacuation. I'll be playing woman and a dog.
Thank you for volunteering.
Richard?
Kia ora and thank you. A few questions like Joe, and I think it is cognizant to try and explain that slightly different way about the benefits, because I think it can sound confusing, but for a lot of people, the 1 kilometre walk to Midtown from Waitemata will be gone and you'll be able to access different things, universities, whatever. So once again, it's sort of like making sure what we put up there doesn't immediately look like a negative when actually there's huge positives. Like the West concern last time has now been fixed through the, and obviously the media played up how bad that was going to be, but actually you've fixed it through the testing but I'm not sure we've sold that back to the community again. We've fixed that issue through testing. So if we could have a bit more, I don't know, I've liked the videos and things coming out lately, but is there a plan to, once again, kind of give a methodical view of where you're, I see those maps online, but it's not quite like you're traveling from here and it's going to be this, like, much faster. Or this is the different types of, these are the types of benefits you're getting from Albany to here or Monaco to here.
A couple of, I suppose, things to say. We have some communication out at the moment focusing on the new network and the connections. The thing that we are working on at the moment and plan to make available to people in the lead up is a sort of journey planner tool similar to what you can use today to plan how you're going to get around, but with our preview to City Rail Link journeys. And so we think that will really help people be able to go and see how their individual journey from their home to their destination will improve, and for a lot of people that will show in a way that's very tangible to them some of what we're trying to capture examples here that are quite high level, but also let them know, some of those journeys that will be easier or better, like catching a bus on the Northern Busway on the NX2, getting off at Te Waihorotiu, and then it's a very short trip to Eden Park Stadium, for example. They'll be able to sort of see how some of those journeys would change, and we'll obviously be promoting that and really encouraging people to go and check out how their trips will improve.
Thank you. The other question, it is along the same vein of everyone else, and I know that none of you are here responsible for what Sean Sweeney said, but I will read you what he said to us at the time. The extra funding and additional time for completion is primarily due to COVID impacts, time lost on site, the knock-on effect of the supply chain, resource materials, costs of steel and concrete, labour costs. People need to remember that Auckland, we endured 2 level 4 lockdowns, 280 days of restricted working conditions. We lost 3.2 million hours through illness with 800 workers sick. Request for extra funding. I'll just go through it. How do you, and I don't want you to comment on the personality, but I mean, for someone who was paid $940,000 a year when he left, to say he was not experienced and would have saved us $2 billion if only he knew. I mean, how do you guys deal with that? You're now having to face us with this kind of, what he said in that interview is completely the opposite of what he said when he was sitting in your shoes. Like, I feel totally furious that someone can be a part of this project for 6 or 7 years and then jump out and, like, I'm not saying you to personalize it, but how do you hear that and then know that that's not true? Like, surely it's not, we could have just shaved magically $2 billion off when we were told and shown completely the opposite.
I think our approach right now is really not to focus on that. Our focus is to finish the project, have it open for Aucklanders, and really that's 100% of my focus and my colleagues' focus, and I really don't have time to dwell on Sean's comments, even though I know him well, obviously, having worked with him for a number of years. But this is not the time and place. I think our role is to finish the project, and I think Aucklanders wouldn't want anything else.
Okay, that's cool. And the yeah, that's a good answer. It just, I guess, as Councillor Williamson said, people coming to us when we're trying to celebrate this asset is a huge frustration. The other question I have, and I know you're not going to give us the dates, but things seem to be tracking well. Are there missing gaps? Are you using this kind of extra time to find other things? I see you've been testing what happens when the people are in the toilets and the power goes off, all sorts of different things. I mean, that's a good way. Are there additional things you're finding out through this testing process that you hadn't seen, or your overseas examples hadn't picked up? Or do you feel like you're tracking along the line of what you hoped?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think we're not finding any fatal flaws at this point. I might jinx it when I say these things, but no, so far, I mean, you're always going to have some learnings, but generally speaking, nothing that can't be remedied and keep us on track. It's just an intense period. This still, I know I've said this before too, but it's a fairly intense period leading up to hopefully handing over a safe and reliable railway to Mark and Bevan. That's our job, and we're getting, you can sense the finishing line coming back to your earlier comment on Sean, that all of the comments that we're receiving from the public are extremely positive and just can't wait for the project to be open. And that's really, that encourages us and focuses us on finishing successfully and well, and having a really, because I think Aucklanders will be excited when they get a chance, as many of you have, to come through the stations and see the finished product. They're going to be very proud.
Thank you. Last question, and that was because of my question, because people are pretty excited, but it was disappointing. Last question, I've heard some of the background. I sit listening to the City Centre Advisory Panel. They're really keen, and I'm hearing a lot, what is the plan for people having a look at the stations, walking through them? What is the big, I know people don't want to spend money on events right now, but actually my dad still talks about being trundled across the harbour bridge in his pram, when he was a baby. Like that the excitement that will come, people might be sceptical of that, but we do need, what does the event program look like? What does the safety look like? How are you going to get people who've never been on a train before looking at it in those first few weeks? Because I think that even though it'll cost a lot, it's part of the return on investment to make sure people see what they've been paying for 10 years.
Can answer that one if you like. So we recently brought proposals around this to the sponsors group, so to Mayor Brown, Deputy Mayor Jesse Simpson and the ministers. So our plan really is focused on the community during the opening. We're proposing to have public open days for planning now, to have public open days for the 3 stations fairly close to the opening as the public's opportunity to see those before the opening. I guess aiming for a couple of outcomes to be achieved from that. Obviously, Aucklanders get a chance to see it. I think we know that Kiwis kind of love this stuff. The One NZ Stadium reported that they had 32,000 people through there in Christchurch when they had a public open day. So we think there'll be a lot of interest. I'm going to work closely with the business associations. We really want that to be something that brings something back to the city centre and the precincts that have been impacted by the construction. So Uptown, Karangahape and the heart of the city really closely involved in that. And also it's also about how we make sure the operations work really smoothly on the first day. So a bit of an opportunity that's not on that really crunchy day one for people to have a look at the stations and see them. So we are putting that plan into place now. We plan to offer large numbers of tickets. It becomes a big event where we do have to think carefully about safety and security. But that's all the work that we're putting in place now, and obviously balancing making it a great event with managing the costs appropriately.
Okay, last question on that. Will you be able to show us, and probably proactively, to avoid that several $100,000 spent on event, and show us it was security, not champagne for politicians or whatever? That I think public will understand the first part, but they won't understand flashy stuff for the officials.
The short answer is yes, and the budget for champagne is nil.
No. That was nil, just to...
Craft beer, no. Toe.
Kia ora, gentlemen. It was me that blurted out, and obviously you know who it was, Wednesday opening. I'm a huge fan of this. I think in 30 or 40 years' time, when we look back on it, we would have said we should have done this earlier because of the benefits. But I have a major concern that the Western districts, where I live and breathe, and lots of people out there feel like they're being diddled out of a great opportunity. How come we were promised frequency akin to the other stations around Tamaki, and it doesn't look like we're going to get anything like it?
The frequency that's been proposed, certainly within a few months of opening, is at 7.5 minute headways from the west. So that is equivalent to eastern suburbs and also from the south. So absolutely trying to make sure that there is no differential between different parts of the region and everybody's getting a good level of service.
So you're saying that we're gonna get the same as everybody else?
Yeah, the east-west is linked, it's connected now, so the frequency is the same.
Can I just also add in there, it's not only the frequency, the travel times are substantially less. The travel time to Waihoatu
you do not have to go down that route with me. I didn't ask about that. I asked about the frequency, because we were being told at the beginning that it would be this amount of time between each train. I'm not arguing about it's going to be better than it is now. Of course, it's going to be better than it is now in terms of trip time. I accept that. But there is what's left of my hair. There are a few strands. Lots of things. I just worry that you have a line from Henderson or from say Swanson, where we could drop off people from Helensville. Are you aware of an offer by a private company to open up the line and use their trains between Swanson and Helensville? And Kiwi Rail said no. And what's it going to cost anything for Kiwi Rail?
If we're talking beyond Swanson, then I understand we've committed to meeting that organisation or whoever once we get CRL successfully open and see what the offer is. But certainly KiwiRail, as the asset owner of the infrastructure, have been fully involved with any discussions around extending further west, and that has been a topic for a number of years. So I don't think anybody is saying
well,
no.
at least, I'm happy that you can guarantee that the people of West Auckland are going to get a train every 7 minutes or thereabouts. So thank you very much.
Julie?
Kia ora. Sorry, that ended a little bit more abruptly than I thought, Toe. Right, so I've got a couple of questions around the testing scenarios, and I too am super excited about this. Sarah's covered off some of the stuff about disabilities and the different types of Aucklanders that we have that will be using this. I was wondering specifically around micromobility and whether you're having some people coming through who are moving a bicycle or an e-scooter. One of the things that I'm a little bit nervous about is once things get going, we find that we have to restrict the ability for people to take a bike or an e-scooter on to only specific services. Sometimes that has happened in places overseas. So is that something that you're including in your testing scenarios?
We might have to get back to you. I don't think that is a part of the testing scenario. And of course, if you were on a train that suffered an emergency incident, you should leave your bike behind and evacuate your person safely. But I'll have to come back to you on that.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. And also just a scenario where, for example, people have a lot of luggage. I mean, we already have that on trains when people are going to the airport. I've seen people move some crazy stuff on public transport, mostly buses, because that's what I catch, like chairs, like a whole chair that a guy was carrying and then he would sit down on inside the bus. It was quite cool. So I'm just interested in, it will be useful, I think, to perhaps include some chairs and other large objects in some of the testing that's to come, as well as bikes and e-scooters, which will be much more likely. The other thing I was wondering about in the testing is whether, obviously you're focused on evacuation, but I'm thinking about smaller scale safety scenarios. So, for example, incidents of self-harm, which we know is an issue on our rail network in particular, but also worker safety scenarios, situations where, there's a fight happening on the platform. Are you testing those kinds of things as well?
I think the short answer is yes. Maybe we can come back with more detail on exactly the scenarios. I know that some of them include that have been described as public disorder incident in the station.
Sure.
So it's not just about a fire and a fire evacuation. And some of them, particularly the smaller ones on the list that we had there that are a bit smaller in scale, are those kind of things that would happen in a station and might require a response by a combination of the station staff and emergency services.
Great. I think having Waitemata, formerly known as Britomart, is currently our only sort of station like this. I think it's really important that we do some testing of those different kinds of scenarios because they will play out quite differently in the underground context, I think. The other thing, a couple of other things were Councillor Hills has mentioned some stuff around comms and information that we can use around the benefits around some of the obviously travel times and what you'll now be able to access more easily. I was thinking too about some of the design elements that we're seeing, some of the public conversations that are happening. My strong suspicion, and from my one tour that I've been able to do so far, the information I've had is that often what looks like a fancy feature actually has a practical purpose as well. So things, for example, like dealing with the overwhelming sound that you might otherwise have in a space by having a pretty ceiling, if you see what I mean. That would be another story that I think would be really useful to tell. So is there any plan to look at some of those design elements, telling the story of their practical as well as their often cultural references and things like that?
We definitely have the plan to help people understand the significance in the design. I think we probably have to just take as a point of feedback that some of kind of incorporating what the practical functions are of some of those features as well. Thank you.
Yeah. And then finally, I'm particularly interested in, and this is not necessarily something that will come out through the evacuation scenarios, the emergency settings, but I'm particularly interested in the thinking about how moving large numbers of people to and from Eden Park is going to work once things are fully operational. Historically, in terms of train stations, people have used Kingsland, but actually Mangawhai station is going to become a really important connection. And my sense is that in particular for people with mobility issues, it's probably going to make a lot more sense for them to come through from Mangawhai rather than Kingsland, which is quite restricted, only having one lift and things like that. So is there any thinking and work being done with Eden Park about how some of those scenarios might work, what some of the comms might need to be? Because people will automatically get off at Kingsland, but actually maybe we need to get ahead of that. So what are the thoughts on that?
Obviously, there's a whole new service pattern being put in place for CRL, which we touched on today, and that makes special event management at Kingsland and Eden Park a lot better for the customer, a lot better experience, because you'll be able to get direct line, for example, east, whereas you obviously couldn't previously. So we're currently developing those special event service patterns on now that the timetable has been confirmed and now that the structure has been confirmed around the services. We are engaging with Eden Park as well, so yes, that work is underway.
Great. And just to make you aware, there's quite a lot happening in that space at the moment. There's obviously the changes that are coming for them as a stadium and the way that they operate that have come through from central government. There's comprehensive parking management plans being looked at. There's a whole lot of stuff there's about 3 or 4 different things as well as this all operating in that space at the moment. So I'd really encourage you to involve the local board in those conversations because they're sort of pulling all of those different strands together. I think we learnt from the tattoo that when we had a whole lot of people coming to Eden Park who weren't necessarily the traditional users, we had a really good discussion about that with AT back at the time, through this committee, where we had a lot of people who caught the Northern Busway, got on to the train system, got spat out at Kingsland, but didn't have an experience of doing it that way before, perhaps had more mobility issues. So I guess I just point that one to you as a particular example that could be well looked at for how you go on with those conversations. Thanks, Chair.
Shane?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I was looking at your website and specifically benefits and costings. And I note a really awesome chart there, which I'll actually allude to when we get to debate. But you've listed an $11.9 billion economic benefit as a result of the CRL. Can I just ask where that figure has come from? Is it an internal measure, or has it been checked by someone, or can you talk me through that a bit more?
The benefits analysis was put together with help from PwC. So that's, there's been a couple of reviews of that over time, and I think Barry might comment if there's a further review to come. But yes, it's something that's looked at on a regular basis.
Yes, there is a update of the benefits realisation, which will come to this to the committee in July.
It's fantastic. I reserve my right to speak. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Greg?
Thank you. Just through the chair, just the conversation we had a little bit earlier around questioning around the West and that potential to run passenger rail further out from Auckland, maybe, you know, Huapai out to Helensville there. What's the role of the gentleman sitting in front of us here? What's the role in terms of advocacy, or do you have any role with Kiwi Rail? I know when we've had the Kiwi Rail in here and we've had the chairman here, he's been quite clear on a number of times that once CRL was open, that would create capacity and resourcing, that they could have a better look into the potential running passenger rail out from there. So the question is just in terms of your role in helping advocate for that. Do you have any role in that, or do we need to pick that up ourselves as an organisation?
Oh, look, I can definitely pass that back to management and all that around that. I know we've had discussions around looking at potentially, if you look at the south, obviously there's growth nodes down there with Tuakau and Pokeno and so on, and we're also looking at the Golden Triangle, so electrification for freight services all the way to Tauranga and all that, and that would then enable EMU services to run further. Up in the west, you know, we've obviously got growth nodes there at Huapai and Kumeu, Waimelku and so on. We used to run a trial service out there back in the early 2000s and all that, just to test the waters and so on. But again, the biggest constraining factor there is the Waitakere tunnel and all that. It's too small. It can fit freight, but it can't fit the gauge for EMUs because of the pantograph and the OLE. So that would be the big thing to have to tackle on that there. So, but in terms of advocating for it, yes, KiwiRail would be keen, and we're always talking to Auckland Transport around how we're going to develop the network further and all that. So, absolutely on that front. But also, you know, obviously you're looking at it from the council point of view of where your growth nodes are, how you want the city to develop over time and all that, and we need to feed into those discussions with you.
Well, look, thank you very much for that offer, and if you do that, I'll make sure it gets followed up from this end as well. So, thank you.
And I want to make sure that we stick on CRL, which is the point of this update. No further questions. So someone like to move? Thanks, Chris. Seconder, Shane. All right, thank you, gentlemen. Great to have you here, and keep up the good work. And at some stage, we look forward to the magical date, and it'll have people leaping and bounding and enjoying themselves immensely. Righty ho. Any debate? So, Christine.
Thank you. And I am not wanting to focus this debate on opening days, except to note that having gone and funded myself to go and look at a few lines around the world that were opening, they have followed textbook practice in terms of the testing, and I want to applaud them for that. I also don't want to talk about the limitations that have frustrated me enormously in the crazy governance structure, the lack of accountability, That has allowed people to drop the ball, and the failure to look at the whole site, whether it was Panuku responsibility or CRL Limited, and the frustrations that we did not deal up until, the end of the Gulf area. We didn't deal with wanting to talk about what the operating costs were going to be, or the grade separation, or any of those things. And I am certainly not wanting to give any airtime to one Sean Sweeney, because he, when I asked a lot of questions, and I have followed the CRL for a very long time, was quite disinterested in those matters that I raised. So my preference is probably to have a think about those who have supported us as we've worked our way through this, because the old quote of success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And what we're hearing today is about making this, and that is not to say that we shouldn't be doing reviews, that we shouldn't be doing other things, but we need to have this opened safely for people. And what you've heard today is the comfort of knowing that everything is being done to ensure a very safe opening. So for me, I want to, because there will be others who will really want to talk about these things later, I want to talk about two people in particular that have actually navigated this to allow us to get to this point. And they're not high profile, and very often we gloss over things, but I think that my former colleague as chair of the Transport Committee might agree with these observations that I'm going to make. That's John Watson. When John and I were given the opportunity to look at the committee when Wayne Brown was elected, the mayor with his delegations and so forth had another director intended for that committee, that was the Transport and Infrastructure Committee of the time. And with the knowledge that we had, knowing that the CRL was going to be far and away the most important piece of work that we would be responsible for, we pleaded for Barry Potter to actually be the director. And I really want to acknowledge formally today my immense respect for Barry, because he has quietly shepherded this. He is not responsible for all of those other things that I don't want to focus on. He is not responsible for the crazy governance structure. And it is really interesting to me that some of the people who imposed that lack of accountability in my mind on this were those that were never really supportive of the CRL in the first place. But having made the commitments, we had to see it through, and Barry has been our man. He has not had an easy time. I know that he has had personal challenges during this journey, but he's never dropped the ball. And I want to really acknowledge him today for the work that he has undertaken for us. The second person I would like to acknowledge, and I got to know him very closely while I was a director of Auckland Transport, is Mark Gilbert. He's very quiet, he's very unassuming, but his institutional knowledge of things transport goes back to about 2000 or 2004 or sometime around then. And that attention to detail and that real understanding, we wouldn't have got to where we are today without it. So, I mean, there are others that I would like to mention. The current CEO has done a great job. I'm not going to make references again to the former CEO, but I would like to just commend this to you, because while there has been a greater spend than any of us would ever have wanted, this is transformative for Auckland and for all of those who had the courage, when it wasn't fashionable to champion the CRL. You know, the Len Browns, the Mike Lees, and all of those others, I just want to commend them. But without the leadership that we have had from those quiet people who have been making it work behind the scenes, I just say thank you. It's going to be a great success, and there'll be a cast of thousands running around and clapping and things a bit later on and worrying about the opening day and so forth. But we acknowledge you today, so thank you.
Thank you. Shane.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, real honour to be speaking about this, but yeah, before I begin, there were numerous questions around the comments in the media from former CRL boss, Mr. Sweeney. Look, I don't want to dwell on it, but I have to say, mate, if you were the CEO, you own the calls around costs. That's you. So to come out in the media and say that kind of stuff, I thought it was extremely unhelpful. I thought it undermines staff and colleagues, it undermines the mood of the city and in the project. And I wouldn't want that sort of stuff to happen again. So very, very disappointing comments there. Speaking of strange, I think we have a quite strange relationship to this project sometimes, because we get these updates and month after month we get questions that are very negatively framed about the CRL and value for money, all this kind of stuff. And I'd respectfully suggest we do have a role in questioning and testing assumptions and risk management and all those good things as part of governance. We've got to do that. But we really need to get behind this project publicly and share a positive vision for it as well. That's also part of our role, to be champions for the city. The benefits of the CRL, they're all available online and they're really something. I'll list a couple of them. Overall economic benefits, $11.9 billion. A $594 million benefit to travel time for road users. That's great. That covers the whole city. $4.2 billion increased productivity and economic output for Auckland. How good's that? $4.5 billion travel time benefit for public transport users. Think of the economic downstream effects of all of these things. It's great. It's fantastic for the city. There's more on the website. I only did my favourite ones, but there's other ones there too. And it's a huge benefit to the city at a time when our economy is really struggling and we really need the help. It's a great timing to open something like this. And especially, I mean, it's going to have effects on jobs and businesses all across Auckland, and vibrancy for the city as well, especially places like Midtown, where there's been years of us desperately needing to do something about the area and to help it and promote it along. This will really help. So it's not just the economics, but it's the opportunities we have in housing and in city shaping projects, civic pride. You know, I'm sure you guys are the same as me. Wherever I go, someone's asking me about the CRL. Nearly every day someone asks me about it. It's exciting for the city. So I would just urge us that in these discussions and outside of the room and with the media, we have strong, positive, champion approaches for this. I can't wait for the CRL to open. I'd urge my colleagues to actually get excited about it. Thank you, Chair.
Point of clarification, Chair, I need to apologise. In my frustration, I referred to Mark Gilbert, who was actually a director of Auckland Transport, who was a champion of electric vehicles. My references were intended for Mark Lambert, who is in the room here with us. So my sincere apologies, and I would like it recorded that it was Mark Lambert that I was referring to, who worked under David Warburton. Thank you.
Yeah, all good. Thank you. Ken.
Thank you. I just, the public want to measure this project and its return to Auckland on practical outcomes. I listened to those gentlemen from Rodney where they said that they mentioned in their discussion about getting the full value from present investments and from present spends. And I agree with the staff people who presented this, who said, let's work forward. That's good. That's what we need to do too. I do, though, want to pull back to the Western Line and to what we can add to that Western Line to make it better and more productive for everybody in the West and for Auckland in total. And I do want to remind people that the General Manager, I think it was, of Kiwi Rail acknowledged that there had been an offer to use diesel locomotives to extend the reach out maybe even as far as Helensville. And I do want to remind people that it's my understanding that the Swanson Tunnel had its floor lowered to take high cube containers, so it is not a huge obstruction to stretch a longer reach of the Western Line. So I'm really looking forward to us being able to add to this as quick as we possibly can as we move along, so that we really help push those key performance indicators out of the CRL once it's up and running. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comments. So I'll put it, those in favour say aye. Aye. And against carried. We're going to break for lunch now. I was hoping to be a little bit further through the agenda than